and from the Gospel of Mark. And our Old Testament text comes from the prophet Isaiah, and it is from the 49th chapter. Hear the words of God as written, translated in the Message. God also says, when the time's ripe, I'll answer you. When the victory's due, I'll help you. I form you and use you to reconnect the people with me, to put the land in order, to resettle families on ruined properties. I tell prisoners, come on out, you're free. And those huddled in fear, it will be all right. It's safe now. There will be food stands along the roads, picnics on the hills, nobody hungry, nobody thirsty, shade from the sun, shelter from the wind, where the compassionate one guides them and takes them to the best spring. I'll make all my mountains into roads, turn them into a superhighway. Look, these coming from far countries and those out of the north, these streaming in from the west and those from all the way down the Nile. Words of God to a people in exile. And now our reading from the Gospel of Mark as we continue in our journey towards Jerusalem. Jesus left that place, Capernaum, remember where he was last week, and went beyond the Jordan and into the region of Judea. Crowds gathered around him again, and, as usual, he taught them. People were bringing children to Jesus so that he would bless them, but the disciples scolded them. When Jesus saw this, he grew angry. He said to them, allow the children to come to me. Don't forbid them, because God's kingdom belongs to all people like these children. I assure you that whoever doesn't welcome God's kingdom like a child will never enter it. Then he hugged the children and he blessed them. Word of God for the people of God. And we have, you want to share the one picture, Andrew? We have our map, again, trying to keep us oriented in the reality of this story and the geographic region where it took place. We're going to share here. We have our map of Galilee, and you can find Nazareth in red. And last week we were in Capernaum, which is on the north corner of, right there. And it's on the Sea of Galilee. We saw pictures last week of Mike and Maggie had taken on the Sea of Galilee. And we're going to travel south towards Jerusalem, which is actually off of this map. And it says in the text that Jesus went south and went along the Jordan and into the region of Judea. But you can see on our map, Judea isn't even here. Judea is south of Samaria. And in order to get to it, he had to either go through Samaria or go across the river beyond the Jordan, which would have been towards a place called Decapolis, which means 10 cities, 10 Roman cities. So he would have gone into that region. And some say that he would have gone to that region beyond the Jordan. That's really not pinpointed by GPS. You can't really find that region that he went to specifically. And it's certainly not a direct route that he would be taking to get to Judea, to get south towards Jerusalem. And Mark's geography, just know that it's not really to be trusted. It certainly did not contact Google Maps or anything while he was writing, when the author was writing the gospel. It does, however, help us tell the story. So Mark uses geography not for GPS positioning and the way we would want that to be, but sort of more like the story when you go down the road, past the thing to the left where the other thing used to be. Remember that? And then you can turn at the third stop sign after the railroad tracks that aren't in use anymore. That's the kind of geography that Mark has. And I think that he makes Jesus go beyond the Jordan, particularly because in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus never enters into Samaria. Because in Samaria, that's a place where there are conversations, always, and you can read them in the other Gospels, in Luke and in Matthew and in John, where the authors always talk about religion and politics. And everybody knows that those are the two conversations you want to avoid, religion and politics. So how about we talk about the weather? Perhaps not. Because we're in this space together in our homes and together as community where conversations about religion and politics is what we do. That's what I contend. It's what we do. We talk about how our faith engages in our daily living, and therefore it's reflected in our politics. Here in this place, where we have conversations about how we'll live together and how our lives will reflect the love of God in all we do. We talk about that in all we do, not just in some of what we do. And that's a lesson that I think we find challenging, and it is, and it was in the Bible, and I think it will continue to be. But there's hope. That's the joy in it, that there is hope, that there is deep abiding hope in the words of the prophet Isaiah and in Jesus as he welcomes the children. The prophet Isaiah, he was writing, the author of Isaiah was writing to people in exile. So they had been taken everything they knew, every institution they trusted had failed them, both religiously and politically. It's been, not only it failed them, it was destroyed. They were captured by Babylon and taken into exile. And then, to put more salt in the wound, if you will, the Babylonians were conquered by the Persians. And everything in their entire life was in total disarray. Their world was filled with conflict, with war, with exile, with deprivation, and through the prophetic word, hope. Hope that they might be able to return to Jerusalem and rebuild. Hope that there would be a time of restoration, a time where there would be no hunger, Isaiah says, no one thirsting, no one exposed to the elements or vulnerable. There will be a time maybe like on Tuesday, right, with picnics on the hill. We look forward to 60 degrees and being able to be outside. They were looking forward to hope and peace and abundance. Prophet Isaiah articulates a stunning vision of the world full of justice and equity, a world where everyone has enough and all live in safety and abundance. It's also a vision of a world of interconnectedness. In this vision, what's good for you is good for your neighbor. And what's good for one country is good for the world. And what harms one harms us all. Jesus, of course, knew those words. He reminds his disciples and the crowd that will continue to grow. Just wait till we get to Palm Sunday, right? The crowd is growing and growing throughout the gospel. He reminds them all that we're interconnected and that we are all called by God to the work of justice and love, no matter the course and the cost. Where's Jesus headed? Nowhere other than Jerusalem. And what has he already told the disciples that will happen there? You and I know. Nothing but the cross awaits Jesus beyond the crowds. And he tells the disciples words that we hear but don't want to take on. That they too must take up their cross. They too must be willing. They too must live into the words of Isaiah, the words that say, God formed us for this, for bringing people together to God and with one another and with restoring the land. That's our call. That's our call, to bring people to God together and to restore the land. That is our religious and political lives. It's what we're to do with our whole lives. I think that's why, in relatively short order, that the gospel writer brings children into the story 2 times, right in a row. Jesus turns to children to demonstrate the concept. He had set in Capernaum, in the midst of the disciples, he set a child there and said, however you treat this child, or any child, that will be the measure of your greatness, nothing else. And you have to remember that children were simply not worth the effort in biblical times. And it's not to say that their parents didn't love their children, but the social investment in children is just not the same as it is in parts of the world. Now, this morning, the gospel finds our disciples and Jesus beyond the Jordan, and their people are bringing the worthless ones, right? The children. And the disciples are annoyed, like, go away. Can you see we have something more important to do? Like, they truly are the disciples, right? Didn't Jesus just tell them? Just last week, if I remember, right, in our story, how you treat a child is how you'll be measured for how great you are, how good you are in God's eyes. Jesus reprimands them and says to them that if you don't welcome a child, you're not welcoming the kingdom. And if you don't enter the kingdom as a child, you won't enter it. I think Jesus is telling the disciples and the Markan community and us that our faith and our politics have to go together. As a child, we're dependent on those around us. Unlike other baby animals that are born, right? They get up and how many times of a calf, they just get up, they stand up in a minute. And yes, they're dependent on their mother, but not like infant baby humans are. We are dependent a long time. We're dependent not only on our families, but on a wider community as well. And that's important because that's the only way that not only will we survive, it's the only way we'll thrive. The childlike nature that Jesus is talking about is the same thing that Isaiah is talking about. They're talking about our interconnectedness, that we are dependent on one another always, not just sometimes. The ancient text tells us that, and the gospel message tells us that. Our faith, our lives, our actions, our politics matter. When we realize the interconnectedness of all our lives with one another, and that the goal of faith is to have it integrated into all the dimensions of our lives, that's where we find freedom. Freedom from the pull of selfishness, and that we can then let the love of God flow not only to us, but through us and to the world. That's true freedom in Christ. That's what we're formed to do, to live into and out of God's love for the world. When we look around, when we look at the interconnectedness in this time in history, it's not hard to see how it's not working so well. We can see how some have so very much, and how so many have so very little. We see racial and economic disparity, and that's heartbreaking here and throughout the world. Here, yesterday, the scouts, Andrew and Jonathan included amongst them, went and put hangers on the doorknobs throughout the village, asking people to share their food. Next Saturday, they'll go back out and the food will be collected and gathered. It will recognize in our community our interconnectedness. We know this, right? And it'll be shared right here in the village of Merton. But as gracious and generous as I know the people of Merton to be, there will be some, maybe more than a few, who will wonder, how is anyone in our neighborhood struggling to put food on the table? I hope you know that people struggle for lots of reasons. Old age and a fixed income and rising costs, disability or mental illness, underemployment or unemployment. And of course, all these situations are complex and complicated. There's no easy fix. And the pandemic didn't make it any easier. And that's right here in Merton, folks. But our interconnectedness goes beyond our community. We're connected to people throughout the state, the nation, and the world, I contend. There is no way that the actions that happen here don't affect the wider world. When any child, any vulnerable person is not cared for, we as Christian people have not lived up to the call on our lives. If we're truly to live out our Christian faith, then we have to confront any system, religious or political, that limits the possibility for any child, and thereby any adult, to not just survive, but to thrive. You see now why the author of Mark didn't want to go into Samaria? Conversations about religion and politics are challenging at best. These conversations disrupt our comfort and challenge us to reassess our actions. And quite frankly, when you look at all the problems in the world that are caused by self-serving religious and political actions, well, I don't know about you, but I just sort of want to throw my hands up and to say it's fine and well for the people of the Bible to deal with that, but it is too big, too complicated, too complex, too much for me to deal with. What difference can I make anyway? What difference can we make? I think we, both personally and corporately, can make a difference. Remember the words of Isaiah? I formed you and use you to reconnect people with God and to restore the land. That's what we're formed to do. And if that's what we're formed to do, can we do it? I think we can. Can we do it alone? Absolutely not. If we hear anything from the scriptures today, it is that we have to work together for the welfare of all. One of the ways we do that in this overwhelming situation, right? It's like, okay, I can't do anything, it's too big. Well, there is things we can do, and there are things that we already do, but one of the things we can do is participate in our One Great Hour of Sharing offering that will be taken throughout the month. And I think, no, I know, our offering, however big or small it is, really can change the world. One of the ways that that happens is that the One Great Hour of Sharing just combines resources from a variety of ecumenical congregations, right? Congregations across the spectrum that believe exactly like we do and very differently than we do, but seek to live out their Christian faith. And one of the programs that the One Great Hour of Sharing does is to provide water in communities throughout the world. And for you and I who turn on our tap and have clean, safe, abundant water, it might be a little bit hard to realize how much of a difference this makes. But here are the words from One Great Hour of Sharing about how access can make a difference. When water comes to a village, everything changes. It touches every area of life, literally and figuratively. Having clean water close by means that women in Nicaragua don't have to spend their whole day walking to its source. So they might have opportunities for learning or vocational growth. Children in Kenya no longer spend their days carrying heavy buckets so they can go to school instead. Improved sanitation slows the spread of disease, so there is less preventable illnesses. Crops thrive in Vietnam, meaning that food security and nutrition improve for a whole community. Families can spend more time together. People of all ages around the world are empowered to provide for their own families today, while also having the opportunity to plan for the future. That's what water does. Our actions matter. They give what is needed: food, water, safety, and true freedom. That's what we're formed to do. And when we do it, when we get our self-centeredness out of the way, over and over and over again, when we see every child, every single child, as worthy and wonderful, and then the work of love, God's power of love, that will erode all the religious barriers, all the political barriers that exist that prevent the well-being of children. God's love flowing through us and through our One Great Hour sharing offering will continue to flow as we grow in our understanding of the integration of faith and politics, the way those things are interconnected as we are interconnected in the world. God's love will flow freely when we're willing to take the risk to have difficult conversations, to go to places of personal and community discomfort, so that we can be transformed by God's unfailing love into the people God formed us to be. May we be a people who trust in the love of God to guide and uphold all that we do as we seek for the welfare of all children. May it be so this day. Amen.